Welcome to CISO Insider, Nightfall's chat with Chief Information Security Officers. We host CISOs from different industries to discuss their pathways to the role, the challenges they face in their everyday work, and lessons they can share with anyone aspiring to become a CISO. This podcast brings you into the world of cybersecurity and gives you a window into the most brilliant minds in the business. In part 2 of our chat with Segment CISO Coleen Coolidge, we discuss what it takes for CISOs to be successful in ever-changing times. Planning for the post-COVID world, managing obstacles to success like investing in mental health, and building resilience and social education are among the topics we're getting into today. Also, catch up with some of the best writing from the Segment security team in the show notes for this episode. Please join me in welcoming Coleen back to CISO Insider. When you get offers for speaking opportunities and engagements, how do you determine what's a good use of your time and where you can make your most impact?
Yeah, I think it depends on where you are in your career. So the general statement is that if you are first starting out in the security field, and as you start to learn things, some painful lessons as we all do of what didn't work and what you're trying instead, I think anywhere that you can go and speak, it's a good idea. So I think there should be a bias towards saying yes. So if it's like everything from a small and local meetup to a podcast to writing an article, going to OWASP or something like that, definitely say yes. And the reason why it benefits the community because you're sharing a bit of like, what did I learn at work? And maybe that can help at least one person in the room. But it will also help you start to articulate your message well. The principles and ideas that you have as a security person, for most of us, it's not necessarily as crystallized as we want it to be. We could talk to other security people and they'll understand where we're coming from. But then when you try to talk to your executive, who might be 2 levels or 3 levels above you, how crystallized is your message for that person? Do they stare at you with a blank stare? Do they understand the most important thing out of what you're trying to tell them? Or are you just another confusing security person who has too many things going on in your head and you're trying to do too much and say too much and they think you're all over the place? So I think it benefits you at every stage of your career to pause and reflect on what you've been doing, the value of it, and themes, and try to put that in the form of a talk. And whether that is a formal talk or informal talk, if it's a podcast, like I think even better, I love podcast formats. It's more conversational. The flow is really good. They're just enjoyable. I think it's just important to do that. As you get busier though, and as you get more well-known, what'll happen is instead of like sort of begging for stage time, people will come to you. And so you might get offers every day, every week, and you simply won't have the time because you still have to do your job, which is securing your company. And even though you'll have even more to talk about at the later stages of your career, you should actually be a bit more choosy and figure like, is there a particular benefit to your company? Like if you're a company person, will speaking at this particular venue help your company? Will it help someone on your team if you speak on a particular topic or if you work with a particular vendor? I think you could just be a little bit more surgical about it and protect your time. But one thing that you should expect of yourself, if you've moved along your career, so if you're an individual contributor, you're like at the IC4 level or above, or if you're senior manager or above, what you should have is like a concept that I used to do Toastmasters. They have this concept of a pocket speech. And so you really always need to have like a running list of things that you could talk about and not just a laundry list of topics, but maybe you have 3 slides that you've been working on in the background. You keep them open every day. And then you have an epiphany, like at the end of a meeting, as you're doing something else, shower thought, whatever it is, you can add it to that slide. What's an evergreen talk that you would want to give that really defines you as a security person? You find yourself like your parents saying the same thing over and over again when you're that security parent. What is that security parent set of slides that you want to tell everybody? Always do these 3 things. But be ready with that pocket speech because I think it's easier to have something that's partially developed and you could take that from there than to always try to come up with 8 novel speeches or 8 novel topics that are well developed in a year. That's a lot of work. If it's the only thing that you're doing, there's some places that maybe the security pressures are somewhat light because maybe it's just extremely well resourced. Maybe those security programs are like very mature and there's maybe less to do for each person, then great. If you can speak 8 times a year on 8 novel topics, good for you. But most of us who have that kind of day job where, it does feel like some quarters we're just keeping our head above water, like you're not going to be able to do that. So always having a pocket speech or two in the background where you can sort of add to it will really help give you that boost.
Have you noticed a dramatic shift in the role of CISOs post-COVID? What changes, if any, will be permanent?
At the beginning of this, I thought there were going to be certain types of changes. I thought for sure that there was just going to be this huge movement to secure the home network, and that, we as CISOs would be teaching everyone about like how to be safe at home if you have 5 roommates or something like that. But really, what I've seen is the biggest change is that security teams have had to get really good at effective async communication. If everyone's in the same office together and you have like a security footprint in each of those offices, just by proximity, it's easier to do your job. They pass by the security people's desks. You go to the same lunchroom and sit down and happen to talk about projects. So because you're there, you just have this gift of proximity. You've been able to build these bonds with one another, and these security conversations happen. So if you're at home for an entire year, and so is everyone else, you don't really have the ability to bump into anybody anymore. That's completely gone. And so, of course, there are things that you need people to continue doing. Like you need to make sure that you've got like a product development lifecycle that needs to have security enter at a certain point. And, there's activities at each of these phases. Maybe you're an organization that gates and like has sign off. All of that stuff needs to continue to happen, and you can't just depend on happenstance. And so just making sure that your processes are really, really solid. So talking to, if you have like a head of PMO or product development, and just going through and making sure, like, how do we make sure that these security activities are going to be caught with every single project? Like, is there a possibility that something could slip through the cracks? Being intentional about talking about security dependencies at the before the quarter begins. And so if you're at an organization where you kind of co-plan your OKRs or your BPMs together, what does security need from each of these teams in the coming quarter, in the coming year? Is that written down somewhere? Is it written down somewhere that those other teams will actually go look at when they're doing their work? So making sure that the words that you use, the written words that you use, are going to be there and like pop up in that lucky happenstance, the way that you were at the refrigerator getting your string cheese when someone else from a different team that you needed to talk to was doing exactly the same thing. Like, how do you create that happenstance through paper, paper docs, Google Docs, and then showing up to the right meetings to make sure that what your team needs to accomplish with regards to security priorities still gets accomplished. It's more intentional. I think it's more work, but at the same time, you don't want to leave to chance. You don't want to leave like the effectiveness of your security program. Is a security person standing right there? Do they like your security team? I think you need to make sure that it's more systemic, and that way things will get caught in time, and hopefully maybe not just caught, like they actually get embedded in earlier.
How can security leaders effectively communicate the issues and problems they face in their role to the rest of the org, especially fellow executives and other stakeholders who may not be the most technical or have the visibility into the work?
I think metrics, scorecards, Slack communications, emails, all of those things are really helpful. I think that, hopefully most security people know that people that you work with, by and large, they want to do the right thing. These are not people who are trying to outsmart security or trying to avoid security or hoping to do the wrong thing and that you don't catch them. This is not their day-to-day job. So you really need to make it pretty easy for them. And that's where that crystallization of the message comes in. If you are working with for example, a product engineering organization, and you think that one of the most important things that needs to be improved in that particular organization is fixing up of logic level vulnerabilities within SLA. If you feel that organization is not speedy enough, or maybe they don't have the resources and the help, or these things aren't being prioritized, rather than, us falling back on our old habits of complaining about them behind their backs, or, escalating on them to their managers and saying, you're not doing the thing you're supposed to be doing, why not just start producing metrics? And so that is a lot harder than it sounds, because it's not that, doing it with any regularity is the hard part. I think it's like, what do you measure? And then once you know what you want to measure, is your company already set up for success to do that? And so for us, in order for that to happen, we needed to make sure that we were using Jira really well. So we have a director of SecEng who is huge into Jira, and that's where we were tracking all those logic level vulnerabilities. He built logic into Jira to make sure that whenever something was late, and in fact, before it would become late, like you would get a countdown through email, you could see what the flow was, the flow for the SLA, and to get extensions approved, to be able to resolve it, to get help. He made Jira the main place that people go to. And so folks were checking that Jira dashboard that would show by department who's late. And then you could click into those areas of who's late, and you could see the particular offending tickets and the state that it was in. And it was easier for people to get unblocked. So there was a lot of pre-work that had to be done in order to make that happen. But because he did that work, we understand our whole organization by like different departments, different teams, and made sure that the tickets were assigned appropriately, because sometimes, teams will change. There will be like some sort of a reorg. You need to make sure that those tickets then are ported over to the correct new team. But from all of that data, from all of those tickets, he created a fronted dashboard. And so we could see how many teams were late, which were the tickets that were late. And then as time went on, because we allowed for people to be able to ask for extensions on the SLA, and I mean, that's completely normal, then we could see which tickets had the most extensions and which teams were those associated with. And so being able to provide that type of at-a-glance information is not only helpful for your executives who don't have time to sift through all your Jira tickets, it's also helpful for you, because now you know exactly, at least from vulnerability management, you know where your biggest risks are. Maybe you give more time for like a P4 than you do for a P2. And if a P4 comes due, like maybe you allow for more extensions. I don't know, whatever your particular thing is. But once you start measuring, you can start holding yourself accountable to the things that you say. And so it's easy to take a snapshot of that dashboard and then send it to the executive over those particular areas and say, most of your org is doing really well, but it seems like this team is struggling. It seems like they're struggling to get their vulnerabilities fixed on time. What can we do to help them? Instead of, these are clearly the bad guys, like they don't want to do the job. Maybe you should do something about them. It could be a question of resources. It could be that they have way too many priority ones that are heaped on top of them. But metrics shouldn't be looked at as something that are bad or they're dangerous. They allow you to have a really intelligent conversation, a very calm and like hopefully emotionless conversation about what needs to get fixed.
We're going to take a brief break and get back to more questions with Coleen Coolidge from Segment. You're listening to CISO Insider from Nightfall AI.
Nightfall DLP is the industry's first cloud-native data loss prevention solution designed for high-growth companies securing sensitive data across cloud apps like Slack, GitHub, and Google Drive. Traditional data security solutions are painful to implement, require heavy overhead, and have high false positive rates. Nightfall customers are up and running in minutes with our library of machine learning detectors to protect PII, PHI, and other industry-specific data. Our developer-centric platform allows security teams to configure constant inspection as code for customizable data protection. Learn more at cisoinsider.com/nightfallai.
What are some key attributes of an effective cybersecurity leader as a technical leader, a people manager, and for other functions of the role?
Gosh, there's so many. I think as far as effective cybersecurity leader, I think that there are so many different kinds out there. You definitely don't print them from a mold. It's really like, if it's behavioral, we just start from like a big swath there. I think you have to be brave. I know that sounds a bit goofy, but if you think about what the job is, it's a position of public trust. And your team is looking to you as like this paragon of virtue, I suppose, even if you don't look at yourself this way, you're just a person doing a job. And so if something comes up, and it will in the course of your work, that your team and you notice is not right, and if you don't say something, if you don't use the political capital that you have because you're too afraid of being fired or losing your stock or whatever it might be, your team will start to lose faith in you. And when your security team starts to lose faith in you, they're going to leave you. Or worse, they're going to stay and they're going to do very uninspired security. They're going to be like they think the way that you are, which is, oh, my security leader is just coming into work and just going through the motions. But when it really matters, he or she doesn't stand up for what's right. They don't speak up for me on my behalf. They don't challenge an exec when the exec is, doing something that they consider to be dangerous or like this is a bad pattern. When your team doesn't see you risking to do the right thing, I think that that's when you run into trouble. So it doesn't matter what your background is as far as like how you kind of came up, but you really need to push for the right thing. And then you need to eventually get pretty good at it. I think, you don't want to come across as though we're the persecuted team. I think you want to present it in a really diplomatic but extremely strong way. And then the second thing is, I think humility helps. I've worked with security leaders before who, their attitude is, I guess it's because, through LinkedIn, like everyone who works in security is constantly being marketed to. So it's not just like, can you buy this stuff? But they might say like, would you be interested in looking at this and giving your opinion on, whatever this product or service is? And then also we're looking for people to be on our advisory board. So that's one. The second one is like, hey, we love your background as a security leader. Would you consider being, the director of, or the CISO of, or senior manager of? And so looking in your LinkedIn, you're like, wow, people really think that I'm really good at what I do. So I think you need to snip that connection, because if you believe all of those things that you get in LinkedIn, because I have it open because I use it to do recruiting. There are a couple of things in there where people are like, hey, wouldn't you like this opportunity better? I think sometimes that can get to a person's head. And so when then, you have that in your head and then your boss is giving you some tough feedback and saying like, hey, you really could improve this in your program, or, your team isn't coming across as effective as you think they are because, this is where it's falling apart. And this is the commentary that we're getting from your customer team. And so the attitude could sometimes be like, don't you know who I am? I don't have to improve. I could leave right now and get a way better job. So I think that if you get to that point with yourself, you need to check yourself, because the job market's good for just about everybody who does anything in technology. So nobody really needs to hear that from you. Take that feedback that you get from people, even if you don't want to hear it today. It's super valuable. Someone is taking a risk to give you critical feedback to help make you better. That means that they care. They care about you, or they care about the effectiveness of your program, and it's your obligation to listen. So definitely humility goes along with that bravery. And then as far as skills go, most security leaders I know came up through security through particular paths. Maybe it was like application security, maybe it was network security, maybe they had a strong governance, risk, compliance type background. I don't know. But once you get to a very high level in security, I think that being able to command an army rather than trying to show off your glory days of how technical you once were and saying like, I always kept my hand in it. Like I could still hang with my team. Like, why would you want to do that? Like when you've moved away from that, that's your team's domain. That's their area for them to shine. Like that's like it's the typical like parent who like comes into like a feed or in Facebook or whatever it is, and then like makes it all about them. It's not all about you showing off to your team and everyone else like, hey, I'm not insecure. I just kept technical. Like it's great for you if you've kept technical. If you've had time to really be as deeply technical as the IC5s on your team, awesome. But are you also as good at what your main job is, which is, again, commanding that army? The different parts of your security teams, are you able to inspire and lead all of them? Are you able to put together a roadmap and a vision that speaks to every single person on your team? Can they map their daily work to your 5-year vision? Do your executives understand where you're trying to go? Do they understand why your set of security teams is good? Do they understand the main principles of what you're trying to get across? Like when you become that leader on that side, you need to be very effective at those levels. And if you've spent all of your time like sort of looking down and spending time with people who are earlier in their career trying to show them that you're as good as them, are you spending your time appropriately? So I'm not saying don't continue to be technical, but remember that your obligation at that level is to do a job that your team isn't doing, which is to have command of the message with the rest of your company, with the board, with the executives. Be extremely clear, crystal clear about what it is that your team is trying to accomplish, how far they are, and how far they have to go. Be very clear about how much more money or resources your team needs. That's what your job is. And so I think that's probably the most important thing. And then, I would say keeping a hand in what's going on a day-to-day basis, that's fine. But just make sure that you're not dabbling in minutia, that you're actually looking at the broader picture. So if you want to have a hand in something that's relatively technical, you must have a risk-based reason for it. Is the thing that you're digging into on the technical side related to a top 10 risk that your team is tracking and that you've been mitigating? Or is it just fun? Are you just essentially having the company pay you to dabble in something that's not going to have like a positive security effect on the company? So yeah, and the 5-year vision, I think you need to make sure that people understand that they're not going to be doing the same job 5 years from now that they're doing today. Show them how the work that they're doing now, particularly if they're doing like bootstrap type work, what is that going to gain us when they've done those 5 hard things, those foundational things? What's the next level above that and the level above that? And what are you trying to achieve? Otherwise, people feel like they're on a treadmill for 5 years and they can't get off.
As a security leader, what makes you get out of bed or motivates you to start your day every day?
For me personally, it is, the work is always interesting because there's always something to do in every one of the domains. That's usually based on that multi-year roadmap, because that's something that like whets your appetite. It's like the menu 2, 3, 4, 5 years in the future that you can start salivating over. While that's a good intellectual curiosity that keeps me interested, it's actually the team. I know that sounds kind of like, oh, everyone's going to say it's their team, but it is the people that I work with every day that make that difference. It's because they're the ones who I want to do this work with. And they're the ones who make this actually like magical, because we can come up with what we want to solve in the next 3 to 5 years. But if you don't like who you're working with, if you don't have like a high level of respect for them and them for you, if you don't learn from them and if they don't learn from you, then you could be doing this job with this roadmap anywhere. But it is, I've been really lucky that the people who decided to come work at Segment are people who I would happily talk to them on my free time and, take them out to dinner and like go golfing with them or, whatever it is that we want to do that's fun. And it just also happens that, they are professionals that I enjoy working with. And so it is really them. I look forward to seeing them and talking to them.
What's the biggest issue ahead in 2021 for cybersecurity leaders, and how should we as security professionals approach these issues?
Oh gosh, I was going to say that like 2 things come to mind. One is, this increased focus on third-party security. So all the vendors that we're all using, when you think about what your stack really is, or even just the tools that you use, if, way back in the day, you might have some software that was actually installed on your desktop. There would be a certain number of licenses and it's kind of like all contained and things would be like contained in your data center. Now, when you think about what makes up just even like HR security, if you look at all of the different tools that your HR department uses, none of those things are things that you build, first of all. And then second of all, it's not as though these things were like installed onto a person's desktop and it's being closely locked down and monitored. These are all SaaS tools that you don't have a huge amount of control over. So I think that really like a reckoning with anything that's a third-party tool that you depend on, making sure that not that you send that vendor like 900 more questions a year, because they don't really think adding a ton more questions helps to your understanding. I think it's really about how do you put controls in place so that if they have some deficiencies, but your business insists on using them, how do you guard yourself? How do you guard yourself and your users in that data? So that's one. But then the second thing has been sort of a strange BCP related type concern, which is all of your security professionals who work for you over the past year have been working extremely hard. We're kind of a nervous bunch. We're always looking over our shoulder. We're looking over your shoulder. We're looking over everyone's shoulder. And I think that a lot of security people are suffering from burnout, and we are counting the days until we get, fully vaccinated, until the thing that we want to go do opens back up. I actually think we're going to have like a personnel shortage. where everybody is trying to take off at the same time and go to, Europe or Africa or Asia and just go visit family, go on like an extremely long vacation. People are going to want to take like 2 months off of work. And if you think you already have a people shortage now, imagine when everybody wants to take vacation at the same time. And people are entitled, because if you think about how hard the last year has been on everyone, it's kind of like we might need to do like a shutdown of some sort, like just so people can go and like really go spend time with their family, really go spend time with their friends, and go and do the things that they would normally have done. But who wants to take a vacation during COVID? When nobody's vaccinated, it's not safe, places aren't opened up, and then you're afraid for your life and your family's life. Of course, you're not feeling like you want to go on a fun vacation and just throw caution to the wind. And I think that is going to happen once we reach a certain tipping point on how many is, particularly in the US, what percentage of our population is vaccinated. I think a lot of people are going to take off at the same time. And I think that's actually going to become the bigger problem. Everyone has put their lives on hold. So think about all of your friends who are like, we're going to get married, or we're going to, if they have a new baby, we're going to take the new baby to go to, I don't know, Australia back home to visit the rest. Everyone is going to leave. And so I would encourage the CISOs and really just any other business leaders, know that it's going to happen. Don't hope that it's not going to happen, because it is. We have this pent up need to get out of here. It's a very human need. And so what are you going to do? How are you going to stagger that now? Try to make plans if you can, to see at least you can have minimum coverage at all times, because you just don't want an entire department out at the same time.
So do you have any advice for young security practitioners coming up in the COVID era?
I think maybe the COVID twist on it is it's something that wasn't necessarily as apparent before, which is if you wanted that really good security job and you're relatively early in your career, you needed to go move to it. So if you graduated and you're somewhere in the South or the Northeast, and the jobs in the Midwest or the jobs in the Pacific Northwest, the idea is that you need to be in the vicinity, you need to be in the orbit of that home office in order to be able to be successful, because the way that people had set up work was like everyone comes to this area and this is where all the seniors are. This is where all the mentoring is. You want to be here to hear the water cooler talk. And, as I mentioned earlier in this, we as security professionals relied so much on the luck of proximity. And I think that we've had to be a lot more intentional about our messaging, our teaching. During this past year, every security professional who's in charge of training has had to figure out how do I do this effectively without being in front of the class. And so I think that things have opened up a bit more. It's probably become easier to get that remote job. Although, most companies will have a bias toward, if you're early in your career, try to at least be in the office for at least a year or so you can get a boost on the mentoring. But I think companies are reevaluating that, and they're just like, okay, well, what can we do to support a remote employee so that they can still be successful even if they never set foot into the office?
And what are you most proud of as an InfoSec leader?
It's like the normal stuff. It's being able to work with a team who take a situation that's just frankly not good and decide what the plan is. Like, how are we going to make this from, I guess I've said it before, like trash to class? And what does that plan look like? How are we going to get buy-in to do it? And then planning the work and then working the plan and then actually seeing it happen. I think in order to be able to feel that pride, you have to overcome feelings of, this is crap. How come nobody listens? How nobody listens to me? This is taking longer than I thought. Why does everything have to be so hard? You kind of have to overcome that voice that always tries to make you quit your job, and open up a surf shop somewhere. That reward for hanging in there is being able to see that roadmap come to fruition, is being able to see that, people are seeking you out and saying hey, I want to use a third party that we don't use. What's the process I need to go through? I'm happy to follow your rules. It's those good days where, on our AppSec team, we have somebody who is, his name's Jivan. He is making it so that folks learn how to do their own threat models. And so for people like him, it's watching that first class that the developer leads doing their own threat model and realizing, wow, I think I did this so well that I might have worked myself out of a job. But those are really proud moments. And then I think the last thing that kind of just gives me joy is when I've been working with a security professional for a long, long time. And, we watch them grow from like new in their career to like middle of the career. And then to the point where they're just, you're just like, I could just sit back and this person could run things. And then eventually like that person goes off and becomes a CISO on their own terms, or CISO or head of security. And you're just like, yes, it's just so gratifying to see somebody who starts early in their career, learns the things that they need to learn. Some of them are really hard lessons and overcomes a lot of difficulties. And then gets to the point where they're running their own security organization. They're running it well.
Which podcasts or books have you read lately that you can recommend to our listeners?
I finished a bunch of audiobooks, but they're not actually on the topic of security. They were like, ones like The New Jim Crow, really just becoming more, I think, socially educated, continuing to do my homework and then becoming more active. But the thing that helps me hang in there day to day as a security practitioner is not really like learning more trends. It is really controlling my affect. I think I've said that right. But I have this app called Insight Timer, and it's a free app that you can download, and it helps you go through guided meditation. And there's a ton of free meditation on there. There are all these folks who've, recorded tons of like Buddha's teachings and just different types of like for anger or for relaxation, how to sleep better. And these are all things that security people have to deal with. And so if you think about how frustrating your career is, like how mad some other people make you, I'm mad at the executives today. I'm mad at the developers today. I'm mad at my own team. I'm mad at myself today. We all have feelings. And I think what I realized in some part of my career was it's okay to be very passionate because at least it shows you're invested and you care. But if you can't really let go, like you acknowledge that you're feeling this way, that you're feeling angry, that something unfair is happening, but then if you don't let that go, it interferes with your ability to do your job. And then it also interferes with your ability to put your job away at the end of the day. And so then you bring whatever that problem is with you and you carry it into your home life and your family life. And then your significant other has to hear about it. If you have children, your children have to hear about it. And here you are grumbling about this stuff at work that really makes you mad. And then it interferes with your ability to recover quickly. And so it actually makes you less resilient if you hold on to that junk instead of actually like properly processing it and disposing it, like essentially putting it in its place, because the life of a security person is going to be filled with endless frustration of many different varieties. And so you really need to get good at cataloging them and then figuring out what you're going to do about it. And then when it's not time to worry about it, because it's maybe you're on a date with somebody, you should not be thinking about the problem of what happened today, because that person does not deserve to hear how horrible your day was yet again. Because then they'll tell you, why don't you do a different job other than security? And so I would say like the most useful piece of information I have is, yes, you definitely want your continuous learning. Like if you can sign up for classes, if you have podcasts, read articles, write articles, but also like really get a hold of those feelings that you have and don't let them overtake you. Because if you really care about doing a good job, you need to get a handle on it.
And is there anything you want to promote, like your social media channels, any articles you've written, anything else?
There's an article that one of our team members, Jivan, he wrote on self-service threat models. Essentially, that was the journey that he went through, where he talked about, the feeling that he had. He starts off talking about the feeling that he had when he's sitting in a session where he's taught folks how to do their own threat model, and he sat back and he watched it happen. And he was like, wait a minute, does this mean I could take a vacation? Does this mean I'm fired? I don't know. But I really enjoyed that experience through his eyes, because to me, that shows like the value of doing security well is that you have these moments. Our team is also getting ready to release at least one on access service, which is something that was created in-house. And access service is a tool that Segment essentially made to create time-based access control. So it's not as though if you and I are doing a particular job at work and we need privilege access to some system, and we get it granted because we have the business reason to do it, and then we get the right level of privileges to do that. It's a way of addressing the long-lived privilege, because just because you and I needed that access to do a task or work on a project doesn't mean that we always have to have that. And it should actually go away after we've done what we needed to do, because otherwise you start accumulating a lot of open access that is that's very privileged. And so if one of our accounts is taken over, then if we have all of these long-lived privileged access areas, it's super dangerous. And so access service was built with the premise of like, yep, we can give you this type of access because you need it for your job, but it should be closed. That window should be closed as soon as possible. So access service will be coming up with something. And then we'll have another one on how we think about how most companies do third-party security reviews and how we think that it's wrong. It's a bit spicy, but as I alluded to earlier, one of those ideas was specifically from our GRC team. So Stephen Dustin had some pretty strong commentary on, is it really valuable to give someone a 900-question questionnaire? Is it really valuable to keep going over those same questions and then have, a million different check-ins on those questions? Is that really going to give you exactly the information that you need to feel better about the risk that you're taking with that vendor? And so they propose a couple of other ways to do it, especially if you have a small team and you have a lot of these reviews to get done. There has to be a more efficient way to do it. And so they put their heads together and wrote that article. So that should be coming in the next month as well.
Awesome. I'm really looking forward to reading those.
Well, thank you, Chris.
Thank you so much, Coleen. We had a wonderful time talking with you, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you so much, and I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks for listening to CISO Insider, a podcast created and sponsored by Nightfall AI, the industry's first cloud-native data loss prevention solution. If you're enjoying the show, please leave us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts. The ratings and reviews help more people find us. Special thanks to Wendell Topper for podcast production support. Learn more about Wendell's work at www.createch.us. That's CREATEK.us. Follow Nightfall on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram at Nightfall AI. That's Nightfall AI. And email us at marketing@nightfall.ai with questions, feedback, and suggestions about CISO Insider, including suggestions for CISOs you'd like to hear from. Stay safe out there, and we'll see you again next time.